Trump versus Ramaphosa. U.S. aid at stake over South Africa's land expropriation law. Tensions escalate. Welcome back to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we bring you in-depth analysis of the stories shaping Africa and the world. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In today's video, we dive into the escalating tension between the United States and South Africa over the controversial land expropriation law. What are the stakes? What does this mean for the future of South Africa and its relationship with the U.S.? Stay tuned as we break down the key issues and offer a comprehensive analysis. In January 2025, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the expropriation bill into law, a significant move aimed at addressing historical land ownership disparities. This legislation permits the state to expropriate land in the public interest, with provisions for equitable compensation. The bill replaces the Apartheid-era Expropriation Act of 1975, aligning with constitutional mandates for land reform. Key provisions of the expropriation bill. The expropriation bill outlines the procedures and conditions under which land can be expropriated. Public purpose or interest. Expropriation is permissible for public purposes or in the public interest, including land reform and equitable access to natural resources. Compensation. The law mandates just and equitable compensation, considering factors such as the property's market value, history of ownership, and current use. Procedural fairness. The process requires transparent procedures, including public participation and the right to appeal, ensuring fairness and accountability. International reactions and criticisms. The enactment of the expropriation bill has elicited varied international responses. United States, President Donald Trump announced plans to halt all future funding to South Africa, citing concerns over alleged land confiscations and human rights violations. He stated, "The United States won't stand for it. We will act." South Africa's response. President Ramaphosa defended the legislation, emphasizing its constitutional basis and commitment to equitable land access. He stated, "The South African government has not confiscated any land." Elon Musk's critique. South African-born entrepreneur Elon Musk criticized the government's land policies, alleging they were openly racist. appnews.com. Comparative analysis. Land expropriation in Africa. Land expropriation is a contentious issue across Africa, with varying approaches and outcomes. Zimbabwe. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe implemented land reforms that led to widespread land seizures without compensation. The lack of compensation and the chaotic implementation resulted in economic decline and international sanctions. Namibia. Namibia has pursued land reform through a willing buyer, willing seller approach, aiming for equitable land distribution without disrupting the economy. This method has faced challenges due to high land prices and limited availability. South Africa. South Africa's expropriation bill seeks a balanced approach, allowing expropriation with compensation under specific conditions. The emphasis on constitutional alignment and procedural fairness aims to avoid the pitfalls observed in other African nations. Forward-looking considerations. As South Africa implements the expropriation bill, several factors will influence its success. Economic impact. Careful management is essential to prevent economic disruptions. The government must ensure that expropriate land is utilized productively to benefit the broader economy. International relations. Engaging with international partners, especially those critical of the policy, will be crucial. Transparent communication and adherence to international standards can help mitigate tensions. Public perception. Public trust in the expropriation process is vital. Ongoing public participation and education about the benefits and safeguards of the policy can foster support. Latest developments. As of February 3, 2025, the situation remains dynamic. U.S. response. President Trump's threat to cut funding has led to discussions within the U.S. government regarding the implications for bilateral relations and aid commitments. South African government. The South African government is preparing to engage with the Trump administration to address concerns and clarify the objectives of the expropriation bill. Public debate. The debate continues within South Africa, with various political parties and civil society groups expressing support or opposition to the new law. The Democratic Alliance, for instance, has expressed concerns about the potential economic impact and the need for constitutional amendments. South Africa's expropriation bill represents a significant step toward addressing historical land injustices. Its success will depend on careful implementation, transparent processes, and constructive engagement with both domestic and international stakeholders. The path forward: navigating challenges and opportunities. As the South African government responds to the growing international scrutiny over its land expropriation laws, the country's future trajectory will largely depend on how it navigates the complex issues at the intersection of economic policy, human rights, and international relations. Economic considerations and the future of South Africa's land reform. The economic consequences of the expropriation bill are central to the ongoing debate. In a country where land reform has long been an issue, the effective redistribution of land could serve as a catalyst for economic empowerment, especially for historically disadvantaged communities. However, the successful implementation of this policy depends on various factors, including sustainable land use. South Africa must ensure that land expropriated for public purposes is utilized effectively, promoting agricultural production and improving the livelihoods of local communities. If mismanaged, the land could become an economic burden rather than a tool for growth. Compensation mechanisms. While the bill stipulates equitable compensation, there are concerns about how compensation is valued and paid. Delays or disputes over compensation could lead to public unrest and potential legal challenges. Effective management of compensation will be crucial to maintaining public confidence in the government's ability to execute its reform agenda. Foreign investment. Investors may be wary of land expropriation laws that lack clarity or are perceived as unstable. South Africa must strike a balance between advancing land reform and preserving a conducive environment for foreign direct investment, FDI. Countries like Namibia have followed a more cautious approach to land redistribution, relying on willing buyer, willing seller models. While this has attracted less controversy, it has also been slower in achieving substantial land reform. International relations and the implications for South Africa. The decision by the Trump administration to cut funding over land expropriation could have profound implications for South Africa's foreign relations and its economic landscape. While Trump's threat to withdraw funding may be partially driven by domestic political considerations, the South African government's response will play a crucial role in shaping the future of bilateral relations between the two countries. U.S. foreign aid and trade. The United States has been a significant partner for South Africa, particularly through programs like PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which supports South Africa's extensive HIV/AIDS treatment program. However, as Ramaphosa pointed out, only 17% of the country's HIV/AIDS program relies on U.S. assistance. The broader implications of a funding cut on South Africa's economic and health sectors remain to be seen. South Africa will need to seek alternative partnerships or strengthen relations with other global powers, including China, the European Union, and regional African organizations. Global perspectives on land reform. South Africa's land expropriation debate is part of a broader global conversation on land reform and economic redistribution. While critics of the South African law, particularly from the U.S., view it as a potential violation of property rights, there is growing acknowledgement worldwide of the need for policies that address historical land injustices. Countries like Rwanda and Botswana have implemented land reforms with varying degrees of success, offering valuable lessons on balancing land redistribution with economic growth. The social and political context. A divided nation. Despite the government's reassurances, South Africa's land expropriation law has stirred significant debate within the country. The public discourse is divided, with varying opinions on how best to address the deep-seated inequalities created during the apartheid era. Political opposition, the Democratic Alliance, DA, and other political groups have raised concerns about the economic risks posed by the expropriation bill. They argue that land reform should be approached cautiously, with an emphasis on promoting economic growth and securing property rights. These parties are likely to continue opposing the bill through legal and parliamentary avenues, potentially stalling its implementation. The role of traditional leaders. In rural areas, traditional leaders and landowners have significant influence over land management, and their support or opposition to the expropriation bill will be crucial. Historically, land reform in South Africa has faced resistance from rural elites who perceive it as a threat to their control over resources. Public opinion. While there is broad support for land reform in principle, many South Africans remain concerned about the potential for economic instability and social unrest. Public opinion may shift depending on how the government addresses these concerns and how the benefits of land reform are communicated to the broader population. The broader African landscape. Lessons from other nations. Land expropriation and reform are not unique to South Africa. Across the African continent, several nations have attempted to address the legacy of colonial land dispossession and apartheid-like policies. These experiences provide valuable insights into what works and what does not in the pursuit of equitable land reform. Zimbabwe. Perhaps the most controversial example of land reform, Zimbabwe's land expropriation policy led to widespread farm seizures without compensation. This resulted in the collapse of the agricultural sector, hyperinflation, and economic collapse. While Zimbabwe's government argued that land redistribution was necessary for justice, the lack of compensation and the chaotic nature of the reform process were major contributing factors to the country's economic decline. Botswana. In contrast, Botswana's land reform policies have focused on balancing land redistribution with economic development. The country's use of market-based land reforms has enabled economic growth while ensuring that land rights are respected. This approach has attracted significant international praise for its careful balance between equity and economic stability. Rwanda. Rwanda has implemented land reforms that have emphasized gender equality, environmental sustainability, and economic development. Rwanda's land tenure system has been praised for its inclusiveness and support for smallholder farmers, helping to elevate the country as a model for land reform in Africa. The path ahead for South Africa. The expropriation bill is a critical step in South Africa's ongoing journey to right the wrongs of apartheid and ensure greater equity in land ownership. However, it is not without challenges. As the government moves forward with the implementation of this law, it must carefully navigate domestic opposition, international pressure, and the economic implications of its policy. Strengthening the rule of law. South Africa must maintain its commitment to the rule of law and constitutional principles, ensuring that land expropriation occurs within a fair, transparent, and accountable framework. Economic resilience. To prevent economic setbacks, South Africa must ensure that expropriated land is put to productive use, benefiting communities and contributing to the economy. Global engagement. Engaging with international partners, including the United States, will be essential for mitigating the potential negative impacts on foreign relations and securing sustainable development aid. South Africa's handling of the land expropriation law could have long-lasting implications for the country's political, social, and economic landscape. How the government navigates these complexities will be a defining factor in determining whether the law becomes a catalyst for greater justice and prosperity or a source of division and turmoil. Engagement with the international community, diplomatic pathways, and strategic alliances. Given the global significance of South Africa's land reform policy, the government's ability to navigate diplomatic tensions and forge strategic international partnerships will be essential for the long-term success of the expropriation bill. While the Trump administration's decision to threaten aid cuts marks a pivotal moment. It opens the door for South Africa to strengthen relations with other global powers that may offer both economic support and constructive dialogue on land reform. Building relations with China. China, as one of South Africa's largest trade partners, could play a key role in counterbalancing the potential financial impact of U.S. aid cuts. China has invested significantly in infrastructure projects across Africa, and it may be in a position to offer support for South Africa's land reform goals. A strategic partnership with China, especially in sectors such as agriculture, construction, and energy, could provide a boost to South Africa's economic development and mitigate the impact of Western criticism. European Union engagement. The European Union, EU, has historically supported South Africa's development goals, particularly in the areas of governance, human rights, and economic development. While some European nations have expressed concerns about the potential economic risks of land expropriation, a more balanced approach, including continued EU investment in land reform and agricultural projects, could be beneficial. Engaging with the EU on creating a framework for land reform that balances equity with economic growth could foster long-term stability and support for South Africa's policies. African Union and regional solidarity. Within the African continent, the African Union, AU, and regional organizations such as the Southern African Development Community, SADC, may prove to be crucial allies in supporting South Africa's land reform efforts. Countries like Zimbabwe and Namibia, which have already experienced land reform, could offer lessons and share their own experiences. Collaborative efforts within the continent to improve land governance and expropriation frameworks could enhance the credibility of South Africa's policy and mitigate potential backlash from the international community. Challenges and opportunities for land reform implementation. Despite the potential diplomatic and economic engagements, the road to successful implementation of the expropriation bill is fraught with challenges that must be addressed if the policy is to yield meaningful results. Institutional capacity and governance. One of the central challenges to successful land reform in South Africa will be the ability of state institutions to manage and implement the policy effectively. Land reform requires coordination across various government departments, including agriculture, justice, and rural development. The effectiveness of these institutions will determine whether expropriated land can be properly allocated and used for the public good. The South African government must invest in the training of civil servants, the creation of transparent and efficient land management systems, and the strengthening of land dispute resolution mechanisms. This will ensure that land expropriation is carried out in a fair and systematic manner, reducing the risk of corruption or mismanagement. Public education and engagement. Public buy-in will be essential for the success of land reform. South Africa needs to invest in comprehensive public education campaigns to inform citizens about the expropriation bill's objectives, processes, and safeguards. Engaging civil society, including landowners, farmers, and local communities, in the dialogue around land reform can help alleviate fears, address concerns, and build support for the policy. Managing social tensions. The process of land expropriation inevitably raises social tensions, particularly between different racial and class groups. The historical legacy of apartheid, during which Black South Africans were systematically deprived of land and resources, means that land reform is a sensitive issue. Tensions between Black South Africans and white landowners could intensify as expropriation moves forward. It will be important for the government to manage these tensions by fostering dialogue and ensuring that the expropriation process remains transparent and fair. Providing support for displaced landowners or those whose land is expropriated can help reduce the risk of conflict and ensure that the process is seen as just. The role of the private sector in land reform. Another crucial component of South Africa's land reform agenda will be the involvement of the private sector. The private sector can play a pivotal role in ensuring that the expropriated land is used productively, contributing to economic growth and employment creation. Agribusiness and agricultural development. Agriculture remains a cornerstone of South Africa's economy, and the successful redistribution of land will depend largely on the capacity of the agricultural sector to grow. Large agribusinesses, small-scale farmers, and cooperatives all have a role to play in land reform, but they need support in terms of resources, training, and market access. The government must ensure that expropriate land is allocated to individuals or groups who have the necessary skills and capacity to manage it. Public-private partnerships in agriculture could help to enhance productivity, create jobs, and generate income for rural communities. Infrastructure and housing. In urban areas, land expropriation could also be used to address the housing crisis. With millions of South Africans living in informal settlements, there is a pressing need for affordable housing and infrastructure development. The private sector could partner with the government to build affordable homes and improve urban infrastructure, ensuring that land reform supports broader socio-economic development goals. A complex and evolving landscape. South Africa's land expropriation policy represents a significant moment in the country's journey toward addressing historical injustices and promoting greater economic equity. However, as the country navigates the complexities of land reform, it will need to balance multiple objectives: economic growth, social stability, and international relations. The challenges are numerous, but so too are the opportunities for South Africa to lead the way in creating a more equitable society. Moving forward, the South African government must focus on the efficient and transparent implementation of the Expropriation Bill, ensuring that all stakeholders are included in the process. At the same time, it must work to repair diplomatic relations with countries like the United States, seeking a middle ground that allows for constructive dialogue on land reform and its implications. Ultimately, South Africa's ability to navigate these challenges will determine the success of its land reform agenda and its position in the global community. As this debate unfolds, the international community, along with South African citizens, will be watching closely to see whether the land expropriation process can strike a balance between addressing historical wrongs and fostering long-term economic growth and social cohesion. The role of international law in South Africa's land reform. As South Africa proceeds with its land reform agenda, it is crucial for the government to ensure that the policy aligns with international legal standards. This is especially important considering the potential for disputes to be raised before international bodies such as the United Nations or the International Court of Justice, ICJ, should other nations, especially those critical of South Africa's approach, bring claims against it. South Africa's engagement with international legal frameworks will be essential for maintaining its global standing and avoiding negative legal precedents that could hinder further reforms. International human rights law. One of the primary concerns raised by critics, including the Trump administration, is the allegation that the land expropriation law violates human rights, particularly the right to property. Under international human rights law, the right to property is protected in various treaties, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. However, international human rights law also allows for the expropriation of property for public purposes, provided that fair compensation is given and the expropriation is conducted in a manner consistent with domestic legal frameworks. South Africa's legal team will need to carefully demonstrate how the expropriation bill complies with these international standards, ensuring that its land reform efforts are seen as legitimate under both domestic and international law. The government's legal position must emphasize that the law aims to rectify past wrongs, particularly the forced removals and land dispossession during apartheid. Balancing land reform and international trade law. South Africa's international trade obligations could also be affected by the expropriation bill. Under the World Trade Organization, WTO, rules, the country is required to adhere to fair trade principles, which include non-discriminatory practices and protection of foreign investments. While land expropriation laws are often exempt from trade rules, South Africa will need to manage potential backlash from multinational corporations and foreign investors who may fear that their properties could be expropriated without adequate compensation. To mitigate such risks, South Africa should consider entering into bilateral agreements with key investors or trading partners that protect foreign investments while allowing for land reform to continue. This could be achieved through mechanisms such as providing compensation guarantees or offering alternative forms of restitution to foreign landowners affected by the expropriation process. The potential for economic diversification through land reform. South Africa's land reform could open doors to broader economic diversification, which is essential in a country where a large portion of the economy is still dependent on mining and agriculture. Land redistribution could enable the country to address deep structural inequalities and spur growth in new sectors. Smallholder farming and rural development. Land redistribution offers the opportunity to promote smallholder farming, which could help reduce rural poverty. By granting access to land to a broader range of South Africans, including women, youth, and previously disadvantaged communities, the government could unlock new agricultural potential, improve food security, and contribute to poverty alleviation in rural areas. However, this will require significant investments in skills development and financial support for new farmers to ensure that they are equipped to succeed. Furthermore, the government could incentivize small businesses and cooperatives in rural areas, providing them with the tools to succeed in agricultural value chains. These cooperatives could also serve as incubators for small-scale agribusinesses, enabling rural communities to not only grow crops, but also process, package, and market their products. This would create jobs and build local economies while fostering social cohesion. Diversification into ecotourism and renewable energy. Land reform could also encourage diversification into other sectors, such as ecotourism and renewable energy. South Africa has vast natural resources, and by promoting sustainable land use practices, it could become a leader in ecotourism. Land reform could also facilitate the development of renewable energy projects such as wind and solar farms, which would contribute to both energy security and job creation. The establishment of protected areas and the promotion of land use for conservation purposes could make ecotourism a key industry. Sustainable practices in land management would help preserve South Africa's rich biodiversity, attracting tourists and investors looking to support eco-friendly initiatives. The importance of regional and continental cooperation land reform in South Africa cannot be viewed in isolation. The challenges of land inequality are shared by many countries in Africa, and South Africa's approach to land expropriation could serve as a model for other nations facing similar challenges. By fostering regional cooperation and supporting land reform efforts across the continent, South Africa could position itself as a leader in driving Pan-African solutions to land and economic inequality. African Union and regional cooperation. The African Union, AU, and regional organizations like the Southern African Development Community, SADC, play a critical role in promoting land reform policies that address the continent's legacy of colonial land dispossession. Through policy coordination and collaboration, South Africa could share its experiences with other African nations while also learning from their successes and challenges in implementing land reform. By aligning its land reform policies with broader continental goals, South Africa could create a more integrated and cooperative approach to land redistribution that benefits not only South Africa, but the entire African continent. Strengthening regional ties could also help mitigate the risk of external pressure from Western countries that might seek to undermine South Africa's policy for ideological or economic reasons. African Land Governance Initiative. There is an ongoing push in Africa to improve land governance across the continent. Initiatives like the African Land Policy Initiative, ALPI, spearheaded by the AU, aim to establish frameworks for land management that ensure the fair and equitable distribution of land. South Africa could benefit from participating in these initiatives as they provide opportunities for collective action on land issues and the exchange of best practices. towards a just and equitable land reform process. As South Africa moves forward with its land expropriation agenda, it faces a complex and evolving landscape. The government's ability to balance domestic imperatives with international expectations will be crucial for the success of the expropriation bill. By focusing on fair and transparent land reform, South Africa can begin to address the deep-rooted inequalities in land ownership that have persisted since the apartheid era. In doing so, South Africa can create a more inclusive and sustainable economy, fostering social stability and paving the way for broader development. However, this will require careful planning, effective governance, and the support of both domestic and international stakeholders. Through strategic diplomacy, engagement with African partners, and a commitment to fair and transparent land reform, South Africa can demonstrate to the world that it is possible to redress historical injustices without undermining economic stability or international relationships. The road ahead will be challenging, but the potential rewards for South Africa and the broader African continent are immense. Ensuring inclusivity and reducing tensions in the land reform process. The success of South Africa's land reform depends not only on economic factors, but also on social inclusivity and reducing the tensions that arise from such a divisive issue. Land expropriation, even when done within the legal framework and with fair compensation, has the potential to create social unrest if the process is perceived to be unjust or discriminatory. Ensuring equity in land allocation. One of the primary goals of land reform in South Africa is to ensure that land is distributed more equitably among all South Africans, particularly historically marginalized groups. However, achieving equitable land redistribution is no simple task. The government will need to ensure that land is allocated not just to the politically connected, but also to the landless and disadvantaged communities that need it most. The success of this initiative will hinge on the government's ability to target areas with the greatest need, such as rural communities and small farmers who have long been excluded from land ownership. The creation of a transparent, well-regulated land allocation system will be vital to avoid accusations of favoritism or corruption. Independent oversight and public accountability mechanisms could also be established to ensure that land is distributed fairly and according to clearly defined criteria. This will be a challenge given South Africa's history of land disputes and tensions over racial ownership patterns, but careful attention to these concerns will be critical for maintaining peace and social stability. Managing public sentiment and resistance. While the land expropriation law has garnered widespread support among certain sectors of the population, it has also faced strong opposition, especially from groups who feel that they will lose out under the new regime. This includes many white farmers, who have long been associated with large-scale commercial agriculture. Their concern over the potential for unfair land seizures without adequate compensation is a major point of contention. To manage this resistance, the South African government must work on creating a broad public dialogue that emphasizes the legitimacy and importance of land reform while also addressing the concerns of landowners. By including all stakeholders, from large landowners to marginalized communities, in the conversation, the government can help diffuse tensions and create a more balanced understanding of the policy. Open forums, town hall meetings, and mediation mechanisms will play a role in fostering a more inclusive and cooperative process. In addition, the government will need to ensure that there is robust legal support for those who feel aggrieved by land expropriation decisions. This could include creating a special tribunal or panel to hear appeals and grievances from those whose land is expropriated. Providing a fair and transparent process for dispute resolution will help manage the social tensions that often arise when property rights are contested. A comprehensive approach to rural development and economic empowerment. While land redistribution is a critical aspect of South Africa's reform, it cannot stand alone as the sole solution to the country's deeply entrenched social and economic inequalities. For the land reform process to be truly transformative, it must be accompanied by a broader strategy of rural development that includes education, infrastructure, healthcare, and access to financial resources. Education and capacity building. Land reform without the necessary educational and training components is unlikely to succeed. The government should prioritize providing education and capacity building to individuals who receive land through expropriation. This could include agricultural training, financial literacy, and business management courses to equip new landowners with the skills needed to successfully farm the land or use it for other productive purposes. South Africa has a relatively strong education system, but rural areas have often been underfunded. By improving educational access in these areas, the government could help reduce poverty and enhance the effectiveness of land redistribution. Infrastructure development. In rural areas, land expropriation will need to be accompanied by infrastructure development to ensure that land can be used productively. Access to roads, irrigation systems, electricity, and markets will be vital to help new landowners thrive. The government could partner with private companies, NGOs, and international development partners to invest in rural infrastructure projects. This could help facilitate economic activities in rural areas and ensure that new landowners have the necessary tools to develop the land they receive. Access to credit and financial support. One of the key barriers to land reform in South Africa is the lack of access to credit and financial resources for smallholders and emerging farmers. The government could introduce financial mechanisms such as low-interest loans or grants to support land reform beneficiaries. In addition, the creation of a land bank or a specific fund dedicated to land reform could help new farmers purchase the necessary equipment, seeds, and fertilizers to make their land productive. This financial support would ensure that land expropriated for public use does not become a liability, but a valuable asset that contributes to the economy. Mitigating the risk of economic decline. South Africa must carefully balance its land expropriation policy with the need to maintain a stable economy. Concerns about economic instability due to mass land redistribution without compensation are valid, especially considering the central role that agriculture and mining play in the country's economy. Sudden shifts in land ownership could destabilize industries, affect export markets, and reduce investor confidence. Diversification of the economy. To avoid over-reliance on land-based industries, South Africa must continue to diversify its economy. The government has already taken steps to encourage growth in sectors such as tourism, renewable energy, and technology. These sectors can provide alternative sources of income for rural communities that are transitioning from agriculture to more diversified forms of economic activity. By investing in education and infrastructure, South Africa can create a more resilient economy that is less vulnerable to external shocks and commodity price fluctuations. Support for commercial farmers and agribusinesses. In addition to supporting emerging farmers, South Africa must continue to support established commercial farmers and agribusinesses. These enterprises play a crucial role in the national economy, contributing significantly to employment and exports. Providing incentives for these businesses to continue operating within the reformed land framework will help ensure that the agricultural sector remains competitive on the global stage. This support could include subsidies for sustainable farming practices, tax incentives for agribusinesses investing in rural development, and promoting partnerships between smallholder farmers and larger agribusinesses. Long-term vision. Transforming South Africa's agricultural sector land expropriation represents more than just a political or social policy. It has the potential to redefine the very nature of South Africa's agricultural sector. By promoting land redistribution and sustainable land use practices, South Africa could become a leader in agricultural innovation, food security, and rural development across Africa. Sustainability and environmental stewardship. Land reform should not only focus on redistributing land, but also on ensuring that it is managed sustainably. South Africa, with its diverse ecosystems, has the potential to promote innovative agricultural practices that protect the environment. By promoting sustainable farming techniques such as agroecology, conservation agriculture, and organic farming, the country can ensure that land reform benefits both people and the environment. Regional agricultural cooperation. South Africa's land reform policy could serve as a model for other African nations grappling with similar challenges. By working with regional partners, South Africa can help promote agricultural reforms across the continent, ensuring that land reform is not just a national issue, but a continental one. Collaboration with neighboring countries in southern Africa could lead to shared strategies for improving food security and building resilient agricultural systems that benefit all nations in the region. The future of South African land reform. South Africa's land expropriation process is undoubtedly complex, but it also holds the potential to catalyze significant social and economic transformation. As the government continues to navigate this challenge, the international community, domestic stakeholders, and citizens must remain engaged and invested in the process. The path to a just and equitable land reform policy will require time, patience, and a willingness to work together for the collective good. Through careful policy design, engagement with international and domestic stakeholders, and a commitment to sustainable and inclusive growth, South Africa can create a more equitable society and lead the way in reforming land policies across Africa. The role of international pressure and South Africa's sovereignty. As South Africa moves forward with its land expropriation efforts, the potential for international pressure to influence its policies remains significant. While South Africa has consistently emphasized its sovereignty and the need to address historical injustices, the response from global powers, particularly the United States, raises important questions about how far the country can go in pursuing policies that may conflict with international expectations. Maintaining sovereignty in the face of external criticism. One of the key aspects of South Africa's defense of its land reform policy has been its emphasis on constitutional sovereignty and the nation's right to implement policies that address the legacies of apartheid. President Ramaphosa's response to Trump's threat to withdraw U.S. funding has been to reiterate that South Africa is a constitutional democracy with its own legal frameworks, and that the expropriation bill is grounded in South African law and constitutional principles. Ramaphosa has also underscored that the bill does not amount to confiscation of land, but is rather a fair and just process aimed at addressing land ownership imbalances. The question, however, is how South Africa can balance its commitment to sovereignty with the potential economic and diplomatic repercussions of this conflict. While Trump's threat to cut U.S. aid may not dramatically impact South Africa's economy in the short term, it sends a strong signal about how Western powers could potentially exert influence over African nations that pursue policies viewed as contentious. The future of South Africa's international relationships hinges on how the country addresses these pressures, which may require strategic diplomatic negotiations and the strengthening of partnerships outside traditional Western circles. Engaging the international community constructively. Rather than retreating from international engagement, South Africa could turn the current diplomatic challenges into an opportunity to showcase its commitment to a just and inclusive global order. Through proactive diplomacy, South Africa could engage with international partners to explain its land reform policies and to seek mutual understanding on contentious issues. This may involve framing land reform as part of a broader effort to achieve Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, poverty reduction, and social justice on the African continent. South Africa's engagement with other nations in the Global South, especially other African countries that are also grappling with land issues, could help position it as a leader in the global discourse on land reform. By advocating for fair, transparent, and inclusive land reform models at international forums such as the United Nations, South Africa could potentially shift the global narrative on land expropriation to reflect the historical realities and the need for justice in post-colonial societies, policy coherence, and long-term sustainability. For the expropriation bill to truly succeed, it must be integrated into a broader, coherent national policy agenda that includes land reform as one part of a comprehensive strategy for inclusive economic growth. The country's future economic success will depend on the capacity of the government to implement land reform alongside policies that promote job creation, social welfare, and broader socioeconomic development. The role of economic diversification in land reform. South Africa's dependence on traditional sectors such as mining and agriculture for economic growth has made it vulnerable to global commodity price fluctuations. A successful land reform agenda, combined with policies that encourage diversification into other sectors such as technology, services, and renewable energy, could position South Africa as a more resilient and competitive economy. Diversification of the economy should be seen as complementary to land reform. For example, in rural areas where land reform efforts are focused, encouraging the development of small and medium enterprises, SMEs, agricultural processing, and ecotourism could help create jobs and economic opportunities that go beyond primary agriculture. By fostering a diversified rural economy, the government can reduce the risk that land reform will solely impact the agricultural sector and instead use it as a catalyst for broader economic growth. The importance of financial support and infrastructure development. One of the biggest challenges for land reform in South Africa is ensuring that those who receive land through expropriation have access to the financial resources, technical support, and infrastructure needed to use that land productively. The South African government will need to work with financial institutions, including banks and microfinance providers, to ensure that new landowners have access to affordable credit. Similarly, investments in rural infrastructure such as roads, electricity, water supply, and telecommunications will be critical for enabling landowners to maximize the productivity of their land. In addition to infrastructure, the government must also focus on fostering entrepreneurial skills and agricultural expertise among new landowners. Agricultural training programs, financial literacy education, and mentorship opportunities will be necessary to help new landowners transition from being landless or subsistence farmers to running productive, profitable enterprises. A balanced approach to social justice. South Africa's land reform process must also be mindful of the need for social justice, ensuring that the benefits of land redistribution do not inadvertently create new inequalities. The land reform process should be transparent and accessible, with an emphasis on gender equality and youth participation. Women should be given priority in land allocations, as they have historically been excluded from land ownership. Providing women with access to land could have a transformative impact on rural communities, improving food security and economic outcomes while addressing gender-based inequalities. Youth engagement is also critical. With a large percentage of South Africa's population under the age of 35, land reform that provides opportunities for young people to become involved in agriculture, land-based businesses, or ecotourism could lay the foundation for long-term economic growth. Training programs, internships, and support for youth-led agricultural projects can help young South Africans take ownership of their land and contribute to the country's future economic success. A vision for the future of land reform in South Africa. South Africa stands at a critical crossroads in its journey toward meaningful land reform. The Expropriation Bill represents an opportunity to address the injustices of the past, redistribute land more equitably, and build a more inclusive and sustainable future. However, the success of this initiative will depend on the country's ability to manage the challenges it faces, from ensuring fair and transparent processes to maintaining a strong economy and managing international relations. The government's approach to land reform must be multifaceted, combining legal, economic, and social strategies to ensure that the benefits of land redistribution are felt across society. At the same time, South Africa must continue to engage constructively with the international community, explaining its goals, addressing concerns, and finding ways to cooperate with partners on issues of mutual interest. As South Africa moves forward, it must remain committed to the principles of justice, equity, and transparency. By fostering a holistic approach to land reform that promotes economic growth, reduces inequality, and builds social cohesion, South Africa can set a powerful example for the rest of Africa and the world in how to address the complex legacies of colonialism and apartheid. The role of technology and innovation in land reform. A critical factor that could shape the future success of South Africa's land reform efforts is the role of technology and innovation. Leveraging modern technologies will not only improve the efficiency of land management, but also help enhance productivity in agriculture, which is essential for the long-term success of land redistribution. Digital land management systems. South Africa's land reform process would greatly benefit from the implementation of digital land management systems. These systems ensure the transparent tracking of land expropriation processes, allocation, and ownership. Additionally, by utilizing geographic information systems, GIS, and satellite imagery, the government could map out land distribution patterns more effectively and identify areas that need more focused intervention. This digital infrastructure could also streamline the compensation process and ensure that expropriated land is fairly and equitably distributed. Digital tools could also help reduce corruption and improve the security of land titles. By creating a transparent, accessible record of land ownership and transactions, South Africa could prevent fraudulent land dealings, which have been a challenge in some regions of the country. In the long term, a robust digital land management system could become a model for other countries undergoing similar land reform processes. Precision agriculture. Agriculture will be at the heart of South Africa's land reform agenda, and technological innovations in the sector could significantly boost its productivity. Precision agriculture, which involves using data analytics, sensors, and GPS systems to optimize farming practices, has the potential to revolutionize land use in South Africa. By adopting precision agriculture, small-scale farmers and emerging landowners could increase yields, improve land use efficiency, and reduce environmental degradation. The government could partner with agricultural tech companies and institutions to introduce affordable solutions for emerging farmers. This could include providing subsidies for technology adoption, as well as training programs to teach new landowners how to use advanced farming techniques. Through these measures, South Africa could ensure that land reform does not only address the issue of land access, but also contributes to increasing agricultural productivity and long-term food security. Financial technologies, fintech, for agricultural credit. One of the biggest challenges for smallholders in South Africa is accessing financial resources to invest in land development and agriculture. Financial technology, fintech, offers a solution by providing alternative credit platforms for small farmers who may not have access to traditional banking services. By using mobile phones and digital platforms, emerging farmers can apply for microloans, access insurance products, and benefit from other financial services that support their farming activities. These innovations could bridge the gap in financial inclusion for rural South Africans, enabling them to access the capital they need to grow their businesses. Moreover, these fintech solutions could help establish a more inclusive and diverse agricultural sector that includes smallholder farmers, youth, and women. Youth empowerment and land reform, investing in the next generation. Youth empowerment is a key aspect of South Africa's land reform process. The country's young population faces high unemployment and limited access to land, which perpetuates socio-economic inequality. Therefore, it is crucial for the government to create opportunities for youth to become involved in land reform, particularly in agriculture and related industries. Youth participation in agriculture. South Africa has a vast untapped potential in its young population. With a significant portion of the population under the age of 35, the country must actively engage young people in land reform initiatives. This could include providing young people with access to land, training, and financing to establish agricultural businesses. Encouraging youth participation in agriculture could lead to the development of a new generation of farmers who are not only skilled in modern farming techniques, but are also committed to sustainable and profitable land management. The government could partner with universities and technical colleges to offer specialized training programs in agriculture, agribusiness management, and sustainable farming practices. These initiatives could be part of broader rural development programs aimed at providing young people with the skills and knowledge necessary to manage land and contribute to food security and economic growth. Support for youth-led agribusinesses. One of the best ways to foster youth engagement in land reform is to encourage the creation of youth-led agribusinesses. The government could establish dedicated funds, grants, and incubators for young entrepreneurs who wish to invest in agriculture and rural development. By providing financial support and mentorship, South Africa could help young people navigate the challenges of starting businesses and promote the creation of sustainable and innovative agricultural ventures. Moreover, fostering partnerships between young farmers and established agribusinesses could create a platform for knowledge transfer and skills development. This would allow the youth to access markets, technology, and resources that would otherwise be unavailable, leading to more diversified and resilient agricultural enterprises. Gender inclusivity in land reform. Women have long been excluded from land ownership and agricultural development in many parts of South Africa. Empowering women through land reform can have a profound impact on rural communities. Women are often the backbone of farming families, and providing them with the means to own and manage land can lead to increased agricultural productivity and improved social outcomes. The government must take steps to ensure that women are not left behind in the land reform process. This could include setting aside a portion of redistributed land for female-headed households, offering financial and technical support to women farmers, and ensuring that land tenure rights are equally accessible to women. Gender-inclusive policies in land reform can help bridge the gender gap in land ownership and contribute to more sustainable and equitable rural development. South Africa's land reform as a regional model. The land reform process in South Africa, though challenging, has the potential to be a model for other African nations that are grappling with similar issues of land ownership, inequality, and economic development. By demonstrating a well-managed, fair, and sustainable land reform process, South Africa could set an example for neighboring countries in the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and beyond. Sharing best practices with neighboring countries. South Africa's experience with land reform could be shared with other African nations that are also looking to address historical land injustices. Countries like Zimbabwe and Namibia, which have implemented land reforms, could benefit from South Africa's lessons on balancing economic growth with social justice. The SADC region could work collaboratively to create a regional framework for land reform that emphasizes sustainable land management, fair compensation, and the equitable distribution of land resources. Regional partnerships for agricultural growth. South Africa, with its established agricultural base, could lead regional partnerships to promote food security and rural development across Africa. Through initiatives such as the African Union's Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CAADP, South Africa can contribute to fostering agricultural growth in the region. Regional collaboration on agricultural research, technology transfer, and market access would not only support land reform efforts in South Africa, but also strengthen Africa's food systems and reduce reliance on imports. Strengthening the African Union's role in land reform. The African Union, AU, plays an important role in promoting land reform and agricultural development across the continent. South Africa's leadership in advocating fair land redistribution could strengthen the AU's regional land governance initiatives. By engaging with the AU, South Africa can help promote a continent-wide approach to land reform that supports economic growth, sustainability, and social justice. Toward a new era of land ownership and economic transformation. South Africa's land reform efforts are poised to reshape the country's economic and social landscape. By taking a holistic approach that combines legal, economic, and social strategies, the government can redress past injustices while creating a more inclusive and prosperous future. Technology, youth engagement, gender inclusivity, and regional collaboration will be essential in ensuring that land reform contributes to long-term economic growth and social stability. As the country moves forward, it must remain committed to transparency, fairness, and accountability. The potential for South Africa to become a model for the rest of Africa in terms of land reform is immense. However, This will only be realized through careful planning, strong governance, and continued international engagement. Through these efforts, South Africa can pave the way for a more equitable and sustainable future, one in which the benefits of land reform are felt by all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or socio-economic background. The long-term socio-economic impact of land reform in South Africa. The long-term impact of land reform on South Africa's socio-economic development will ultimately depend on how the policy is implemented, the level of investment in the necessary support infrastructure, and how the new landowners use the resources they receive. Land reform has the potential to transform rural communities, address historical inequalities, and contribute to the broader national economy. However, the challenges in making these goals a reality are substantial, and careful thought must be given to both the immediate and long-term effects. Improving rural livelihoods and reducing poverty. One of the central aims of land reform is to uplift rural communities that have historically been disenfranchised by apartheid policies. By redistributing land to those who have been excluded from ownership for decades, South Africa can provide a critical means for reducing poverty in rural areas. Access to land is often tied to access to resources such as food, housing, and income. If effectively managed, land reform can provide a pathway out of poverty for many households in South Africa's rural areas. However, this will require more than just access to land. It will need to be complemented by infrastructure development, access to markets, and financial resources. The government must take proactive steps to ensure that the redistributed land is used productively. This could involve setting up cooperatives, providing low-interest loans, and ensuring that there is adequate technical support to help new landowners develop their properties. Moreover, addressing rural poverty will require diversifying livelihoods beyond agriculture. Initiatives such as promoting small-scale agro-processing, ecotourism, and local handicrafts could help generate additional sources of income and support sustainable rural development. Empowering local communities to engage in these alternative economic activities could ensure that the benefits of land reform extend far beyond agricultural production. Addressing the urban-rural divide. South Africa is characterized by a growing urban-rural divide, with most of the population residing in urban areas, while many rural communities still face significant economic and social challenges. The government's land reform policy must consider the reality of this divide and focus not just on rural development, but on ensuring that people in rural areas have access to the same opportunities and services as their urban counterparts. The redistribution of land could be an essential part of bridging this divide. By improving rural infrastructure, including transportation, electricity, and broadband internet, the government can ensure that rural communities are better connected to urban markets and services. This could open up new economic opportunities for people living in rural areas and reduce the pressure on urban areas, which are increasingly struggling with overcrowding and unemployment. Promoting sustainable land use practices. Another essential consideration for South Africa's land reform policy is the long-term sustainability of land use. As land is redistributed, it is important to ensure that new landowners use their land in ways that are environmentally sustainable. South Africa is a country with vast natural resources, and it faces a range of environmental challenges, including soil erosion, deforestation, and water scarcity. To address these challenges, the government should encourage sustainable farming practices and invest in research and development of environmentally friendly technologies. For example, promoting agroecology, organic farming, and conservation agriculture could help ensure that land is used in a way that preserves the environment and maintains soil fertility for future generations. In addition, the land reform process could include provisions for land conservation and ecotourism. South Africa's unique biodiversity offers significant potential for ecotourism, and by integrating environmental preservation into the land reform agenda, the country can create economic opportunities while safeguarding its natural heritage. The role of the private sector in land reform. While the South African government plays a central role in the implementation of land reform, the private sector also has a crucial part to play. The private sector's involvement can help to ensure that land reform leads to sustainable economic development, job creation, and innovation. Partnerships with agribusinesses. Large agribusinesses have the capacity and resources to play an important role in supporting smallholder farmers and emerging landowners. Through partnerships, large companies can provide technical support, access to markets, and capital for new farmers. The government could encourage these partnerships by offering incentives such as tax breaks for agribusinesses that collaborate with small farmers or invest in rural infrastructure. Agribusiness can also play a role in training emerging farmers in modern farming techniques and helping them gain access to global agricultural markets. This collaboration can lead to increased agricultural productivity, which is vital for South Africa to meet its growing demand for food and agricultural exports. However, the government must ensure that such partnerships are equitable and that the interests of smallholder farmers and land reform beneficiaries are protected. Investment in rural infrastructure. The private sector could also play an essential role in the development of rural infrastructure, particularly in areas that may otherwise be overlooked by traditional development projects. Public-private partnerships could help address the infrastructural challenges that often accompany land reform, such as the need for access to clean water, electricity, reliable transportation, and modern communication networks. Companies in the energy and construction sectors could be incentivized to invest in renewable energy projects and infrastructure that supports rural development. These investments would not only benefit rural communities, but could also contribute to the national economy by generating jobs and fostering economic growth in previously underdeveloped regions. Access to financial services, financial institutions, including banks and microfinance organizations, will play a vital role in supporting the land reform process. By providing loans, insurance, and credit products, financial institutions can help new landowners access the capital needed to improve their land or start agribusinesses. The South African government could encourage financial institutions to offer favorable lending terms to land reform beneficiaries, reducing the financial barriers that have historically limited access to capital for small-scale farmers. In addition, mobile banking and fintech solutions could provide smallholder farmers with easier access to financial services. These innovations could help rural communities overcome challenges related to physical distance from banks and financial institutions, allowing them to access credit, insurance, and other essential financial products. Ensuring political will and accountability. The success of land reform in South Africa ultimately depends on strong political will and the commitment to ensuring accountability throughout the process. The government's actions must align with the values of transparency, fairness, and justice. Without these core principles, the potential for corruption, mismanagement, and political interference could undermine the goals of land reform. Transparency and oversight. For land reform to be successful, it is crucial to ensure that the process is transparent and that land redistribution is managed effectively. Independent oversight bodies could be established to monitor the implementation of land reform policies and ensure that land is distributed fairly and equitably. These bodies could also provide a forum for citizens to voice their concerns and grievances, ensuring that the process remains accountable to the public. Transparency is particularly important in the areas of land expropriation and compensation. The government must provide clear criteria for determining how land will be allocated and ensure that compensation is paid promptly and fairly. Public participation should be at the heart of the process, with affected communities given the opportunity to influence land reform policies and decisions. Political consensus and public support. Land reform can be a politically sensitive issue, and it is essential that the government builds broad political consensus and public support for the policy. Engaging with all political parties, interest groups, and affected communities will be key to fostering a sense of ownership and reducing the risk of social unrest. The government should also work to dispel myths and misunderstandings about land reform, particularly those that stoke fears of economic collapse or racial division. A clear communication strategy, backed by evidence and facts, will be essential for ensuring that the public understands the objectives of land reform and its potential benefits for the country. The government must also be prepared to address opposition and concerns through dialogue, negotiation, and compromise where necessary to maintain social cohesion and political stability. A pivotal moment for South Africa's future. South Africa's land reform process represents a defining moment in the nation's history, a chance to rectify the injustices of the past while building a more equitable and prosperous future. The stakes are high, and the road ahead will require careful planning, political will, and the collaboration of all stakeholders. By focusing on inclusive economic growth, ensuring transparency, fostering international cooperation, and leveraging technological innovations, South Africa can set an example for the rest of the African continent and the world. The path to successful land reform is undoubtedly complex, but the rewards of a more just and inclusive society are immense. Through strategic action and sustained commitment, South Africa can transform its land reform process into a powerful engine for social, economic, and environmental change. Long-term regional implications of South Africa's land reform. The impact of South Africa's land reform will undoubtedly extend beyond its borders, influencing land policies and governance across the African continent. As the country seeks to address its historical land injustices, it also faces the challenge of ensuring that the lessons learned from its experience can benefit other African nations struggling with similar issues. South Africa's land reform journey can offer critical insights into how other countries can manage land redistribution processes in ways that ensure social stability, economic growth, and sustainability. Land reform as a continental issue. Land reform is not just a South African issue, it is a challenge faced by many African nations. Several countries across the continent, including Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Kenya, have grappled with land reform policies aimed at addressing colonial-era land dispossession. However, each of these countries has faced unique challenges in balancing the need for land redistribution with the goal of maintaining economic stability and ensuring fair compensation for affected landowners. South Africa's approach to land reform, especially its emphasis on fairness, transparency, and public engagement, could serve as a model for other African nations. By sharing its experiences and collaborating with neighboring countries, South Africa could help build a regional framework for land reform that reflects Africa's diverse needs while promoting peace and economic development across the continent. The Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the African Union, AU, could play critical roles in facilitating this cooperation, ensuring that land reform is approached as a collective regional priority. Pan-African solidarity for equitable land ownership. The challenges of land reform are not unique to any one country, but reflect a broader legacy of colonialism and economic exploitation. African leaders must recognize that land reform is not just a matter of redistributing property, but a long-term strategy for addressing poverty, inequality, and the need for inclusive growth. To achieve lasting peace and prosperity across the continent, African leaders must prioritize equitable land ownership as a tool for social and economic justice. Pan-African solidarity can help strengthen efforts toward land reform by creating a unified collective voice in addressing land-related injustices. Countries should consider establishing regional dialogue platforms that promote the exchange of best practices, provide technical assistance, and facilitate the sharing of resources in the implementation of land reform policies. These initiatives could empower nations to tackle land inequalities while fostering regional stability. Advice to African leaders. As South Africa embarks on its ambitious land reform agenda, other African leaders can draw valuable lessons from this experience, recognizing that land reform is a complex but necessary step in addressing deep-seated inequalities. Leaders across the continent must be prepared to manage the potential social, political, and economic challenges of land reform while remaining committed to principles of fairness, justice, and sustainability. Here are some key pieces of advice for African leaders. 1. Prioritize transparency and accountability. Transparency is essential in land reform. Leaders should ensure that the process of redistribution of land is fair, accessible, and free from corruption. Clear criteria for land expropriation, compensation, and allocation must be established and communicated to the public. Independent oversight bodies should be created to monitor and report on the implementation of land reform policies, ensuring accountability and maintaining public trust. 2. Engage all stakeholders. Successful land reform requires the engagement of all stakeholders, including affected communities, landowners, agricultural businesses, and civil society groups. Leaders should create spaces for dialogue and discussion where all voices are heard. By fostering collaboration and building consensus around land reform policies, African leaders can minimize resistance and ensure that land redistribution benefits all segments of society. 3. Invest in rural development and infrastructure. Land reform alone will not lead to long-term economic transformation without adequate investment in rural development. Leaders must commit to building infrastructure, providing education and skills training, and ensuring access to markets and financial resources for new landowners. This will help rural communities leverage the benefits of land ownership, reduce poverty, and contribute to national economic growth. 4. Adopt inclusive and sustainable practices. Land reform should be approached as part of a broader strategy for sustainable development. African leaders should encourage environmentally sustainable farming practices, invest in renewable energy and technology, and promote economic diversification in rural areas. By supporting youth and women's involvement in agriculture and other land-based enterprises, leaders can ensure that land reform benefits the most marginalized groups. 5. Strengthen regional cooperation. Land reform is a collective challenge that requires regional collaboration. African leaders should strengthen cooperation within the African Union and other regional organizations to share knowledge, resources, and best practices for land reform. Regional frameworks can help streamline the process, ensure consistency, and prevent conflicts over land ownership and use. Summary of key messages. In summary, South Africa's land reform process represents a pivotal moment for the country as it seeks to address the legacy of apartheid and promote greater social and economic equity. The key to its success lies in creating a balanced approach that combines fairness, transparency, public engagement, and sustainable development. However, South Africa's experience is not an isolated one. It offers valuable lessons for other African nations grappling with land reform. The lessons from South Africa's land reform include the importance of transparency and accountability, the need for inclusive and participatory processes, and the critical role of rural development and infrastructure investment in ensuring that land reform leads to sustainable economic growth. African leaders must recognize that land reform is not a one-size-fits-all process, and that each country's unique context should guide the approach. By prioritizing equitable land ownership, promoting sustainable land use, and fostering regional cooperation, African nations can turn land reform from a contentious issue into a tool for long-term peace, prosperity, and social justice. It is not only a matter of redistributing land, but of creating an inclusive and sustainable future for all Africans, ensuring that the benefits of land ownership are felt by everyone across the continent. Through strategic leadership and cooperation, African leaders can set an example for the world in how to address the complex challenges of land reform in a fair and just manner. Thank you for watching this episode of The Bold African Voice, BAV. If you find this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe to our channel for more critical commentary on the latest African news. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'll see you next time with more thought-provoking content. Together, let's keep the conversation bold.